I have never been one to fear flying. On the contrary, I've always loved the feeling of being above the clouds, far from the ground. However, that changed on a nighttime flight from California to New York. It was a business trip, and I was eager to reach my destination and prepare for a series of important meetings. Little did I know that this would be the journey that would forever change my perception of flying. It all started like any other flight. The city lights slowly dimming as we climbed into the skies, the flight attendants going through the safety instructions, and then the calmness. I was seated near the window, watching the twinkling lights below. I took the moment to relax and enjoy the view, confident that it would be a smooth and uneventful trip. The night was clear, and in the distance, the stars shone, creating an almost magical scene. As the plane ascended and stabilized, the cabin service began. I grabbed my book, put on my headphones, and prepared for a peaceful night of reading and sporadic naps. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft hum of the engines and the low conversations of other passengers. Some were already asleep, wrapped in blankets, while others watched movies or read. The atmosphere was peaceful and normal. That's when, suddenly, we felt a jolt. It was nothing major, just a slight shake that any frequent traveler is accustomed to. The first turbulence was mild, almost imperceptible, but it quickly intensified. Within minutes, it felt like we were on an uncontrolled roller coaster. The plane lights flickered wildly, and the seatbelt signs were on. The usually composed flight attendants were visibly tense, rushing to their seats and holding on tightly. I looked around and saw fear stamped on the faces of the other passengers. Their eyes were wide, hands gripping the armrests tightly, some praying silently. The turbulence worsened by the second. The plane seemed to drop into the void for endless moments before being thrown upwards again. There were screams and prayers from all around. A baby cried uncontrollably. I could feel my heart pounding wildly in my chest, and my hands were sweaty from gripping the armrest. The turbulence worsened by the moment, turning the nighttime flight into a true nightmare. The plane felt like a leaf in the wind, being tossed from side to side, rising and falling in a frightening manner. The oxygen masks dropped from the compartments above our heads, further increasing the panic among the passengers. There were screams, prayers, and the sound of objects colliding with the cabin walls. I tried to remain calm, taking deep breaths and recalling flight safety statistics, but the reality around me made it nearly impossible. The plane lights continued to flash, creating a surreal and terrifying environment. I looked out the window and saw lightning cutting through the sky around us, illuminating the dark, turbulent clouds. It was a hellish sight, something I had never imagined seeing so closely. The flight attendants, who had appeared so confident before, were now pale and clinging to the seats to avoid falling. Their voices trembled as they tried to calm the passengers, but it was evident that they themselves were terrified. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. I could feel sweat running down my forehead, and my hands trembled uncontrollably. Amidst the chaos, the captain made an announcement over the intercom, his voice firm but clearly tense. He explained that we were experiencing severe turbulence and that they were doing everything possible to stabilize the plane. He asked everyone to remain buckled up and to follow the instructions from the flight attendants. His words, although intended to reassure us, only heightened the sense of gravity of the situation. The turbulence seemed endless. Minutes turned into an eternity as the plane continued to be violently shaken. I couldn't take my eyes off the window, where the lightning was terrifyingly illuminating the sky. At one moment, I looked at the face of the person next to me and saw the same terror reflected in their eyes. I held their hand, seeking some comfort amidst the chaos. When the turbulence finally began to subside, an odd silence took over the cabin. It was as if all the passengers were holding their breath, hoping that the nightmare would end once and for all. The captain made a new announcement, informing us that we were out of the severe turbulence area, but that we should keep our seatbelts fastened until landing. There was a collective sense of relief, but also of exhaustion. As the plane neared New York Airport, I could feel the tension in my muscles beginning to dissipate. I looked out the window and saw the city lights approaching, a reassuring sign that we were almost safe. The flight attendants walked down the aisle, checking on everyone and collecting anything that had come loose during the turbulence. Their expressions still showed signs of worry, but also relief that we were finally out of danger. The landing itself was smooth, almost as if to compensate for the chaos we had endured. When the wheels touched the ground, there was spontaneous applause from the passengers. It was a gesture of gratitude, not just for the pilot's skill in keeping us safe, but also for the simple fact that we were alive. The feeling of being back on the ground, of having survived that terrifying experience, was indescribable. As I disembarked, my legs were shaky. Every step felt surreal, as if I was still processing what had happened. In the terminal, some passengers hugged each other, others cried, and many just stood in silence, trying to comprehend what they had just experienced. I grabbed my carry-on luggage, still in shock, and started walking toward the exit. At that moment, all I wanted was to call my family and hear their voices. I needed to share what I had gone through, needed some comfort. When I finally got a taxi, I sat in the back seat and closed my eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. The city outside seemed so peaceful and normal, a complete contrast to the chaos I had just left behind. I never boarded a plane again without a shiver down my spine. That night showed me that, no matter how safe a flight may seem, nature always has the final control. It was an experience that forever changed my perception of flying. Now, whenever I hear about turbulence or storms, I feel a chill and am transported back to that terrifying night, when I found myself completely at the mercy of the skies. I was on a flight from London to Tokyo, a long and tiring journey. It was a cold morning in London, and I was eager to reach my destination. The airport was bustling as usual, with hurried passengers moving back and forth. I checked in, went through security, and finally sat down at the boarding gate, waiting for the journey to begin. The boarding was smooth, and soon I settled into my seat. I was near the window, a spot I always choose to enjoy the landscape during the flight. The plane was a large Boeing 777 and was nearly full. As passengers settled in, I put on my headphones and began reading a book, trying to distract myself from the long flight ahead. After a few hours in the air, most passengers were either sleeping or engrossed in movies and books. I tried to find a comfortable position to nap, but without much success. That's when I saw him. He was sitting a few rows ahead of me, diagonally. He wore an old black suit, slightly worn, and had pale, almost translucent skin. However, it was his eyes that disturbed me the most. There was something in them, a coldness, a lack of life that made me uneasy. At first, I thought it was just fatigue playing tricks on me. Maybe he was just another tired passenger, trying to make the long trip go by faster. But then he slowly turned, and his eyes met mine. A shiver ran down my spine. His gaze was steady, piercing, as if he were seeing right through me. I averted my gaze, trying to ignore him, but that feeling of discomfort wouldn't leave me. As the minutes passed, my unease turned into genuine fear. The man in the black suit did not look away. He remained motionless, watching me with those cold, piercing eyes. I tried to ignore him, focusing on the book I was reading, but the words seemed to jumble on the page. I couldn't shake the feeling that something terribly wrong was happening. I decided I needed to talk to a flight attendant. I stood up from my seat, trying to act normally, and walked down the aisle toward the back of the plane, where I saw one of the attendants talking with another passenger. When I finally managed to speak with her, I quickly explained that there was a passenger who was watching me in a disturbing way. The attendant looked toward the seat I pointed out, but to my surprise, said there was no one sitting there. I returned to my seat, confused and alarmed. The man was still there, now with a slight smile that increased my discomfort. I sat down again and tried to look around for some logical explanation. Could he be a passenger invisible to others? Or was my mind playing tricks on me due to fatigue? But his eyes, that sinister presence, they were too real. It couldn't just be my imagination. As the night progressed, the plane seemed quieter, and my fear grew. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I felt he was closer. I could hear the faint sound of his breathing, even though he was still sitting in the same row, a few seats ahead. The tension was palpable, and my mind was on the verge of collapse. In an attempt to find some peace, I got up again and walked around the plane. I passed by the man, looking directly at him, and his eyes followed my every move. I went to the front cabin, where a different flight attendant was. I told the same story and pointed to the seat. She too saw no one. I was in a state of total despair. How could it be that no one else saw him? I decided I needed to confront the situation somehow, even if it meant facing my own fears. I returned to my seat. I took a deep breath and looked again at the man in the black suit. His eyes were still fixed on me, but this time, there was something different. He seemed closer, almost as if he had moved towards me. I gathered all the courage I had and stood up. I walked slowly towards him, feeling each beat of my heart like a drum. When I reached his row, I noticed that the seat next to him was empty. I leaned in and asked, almost whispering, if he needed anything. He didn't respond, just continued to stare at me with that penetrating gaze. His pale skin seemed even more ghostly up close, and a faint smell of something metallic lingered in the air. I couldn't bear it anymore. I returned to my seat, feeling defeated and even more frightened. The rest of the flight was torture. Every movement of the plane sent my heart racing, expecting the worst. I tried in vain to fall asleep, but whenever I closed my eyes, I saw the man's face. The hours passed slowly, and I felt more and more trapped in an endless nightmare. When we finally announced our descent into Tokyo, I felt a momentary relief, but the presence of that man still loomed over me like a shadow. As soon as the plane landed and the doors opened, I hurried out. I looked back, expecting to see him one last time, but he was no longer there. I disembarked with mixed feelings of relief and confusion. I picked up my luggage and left the terminal, eager to leave that experience behind. However, the feeling of being watched did not abandon me. I felt as if he were there, lurking somewhere in the crowd. As I took a taxi to the hotel, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Was he real? Was it a hallucination caused by fatigue? I asked myself over and over, but found no answers. The memory of that cold, penetrating gaze still haunts me, and whenever I board a plane, I take a good look around, hoping never to encounter that passenger again. I could never explain that sinister encounter. The experience left me with a sense of vulnerability I had never felt before. Even now, years later, the memory of that man still haunts me. Sometimes, I dream about him and wake up in a cold sweat, feeling his eyes still fixed on me. I will never know who or what he was, but the experience was undoubtedly the most sinister of my life. It was supposed to be a quick and smooth flight from Miami to Atlanta. The weather was clear when we took off, and I was in a good mood, eager to get to my destination. I had an important appointment in Atlanta and was glad to have caught an early flight, which would give me plenty of time to prepare. The Miami airport was busy, but everything went smoothly. I checked in, went through security, and soon I was sitting comfortably in my seat. The plane began to taxi on the runway, and I looked out the window, observing the activity at the airport. When we finally took off, I felt that familiar thrill of being propelled into the sky. The city lights faded as we gained altitude, and the horizon stretched out in a beautiful blend of colors. The flight attendants went through the safety instructions, and then began the cabin service. Everything seemed perfect. During the first hour of the flight, I took the opportunity to relax. I put on my headphones, selected a calm playlist, and began reading a book I had brought along. The cabin was quiet, with most passengers reading, sleeping, or watching movies. The cabin service was efficient, and soon I was enjoying a drink and a light snack. I looked out the window and saw the vast blue of the sky, dotted with a few white clouds. It was a perfect flight, and I felt completely at ease. But that feeling of tranquility began to change when the captain made an unexpected announcement. He informed us that we were entering a turbulent area and asked everyone to fasten their seat belts. I did as he instructed, not thinking much of it since light turbulence is common on flights. However, the captain's voice sounded a bit more tense than usual, which made me a bit apprehensive. The following minutes brought an increasing sense of discomfort. Dark clouds began to close in around us, and soon we were in the middle of a violent storm. The plane rocked from side to side, and the thunder roared so loudly it was hard to hear anything else. Lightning periodically illuminated the inside of the cabin, creating a terrifying scene. The tranquility I had felt moments earlier quickly transformed into a feeling of fear and uncertainty. As the storm enveloped us, the cabin fell silent except for the sound of thunder and the plane being shaken by turbulence. The lights flickered intermittently, and the noise from the luggage in the overhead compartments was constant. Each sway of the plane was accompanied by nervous murmurs from the other passengers. The flight attendants, who had been calm and efficient before, now seemed tense and hurried, trying to soothe passengers and hold on as they moved down the aisle. The intensity of the storm increased, and with it, the sense of panic. The plane seemed to be tossed from side to side, and the feeling of weight in the stomach was constant. Looking out the window, I saw that the clouds were dense and black, with lightning cutting across the sky in all directions. I had never seen a storm so close, and the sense of vulnerability was overwhelming. Each jolt of the plane was accompanied by a tightening in my chest. Then came the announcement no one wanted to hear. The captain informed us that we were experiencing problems with the plane's electrical system, likely caused by the storm. We would need to make an emergency landing. Panic swept through the cabin. Emergency instructions were given quickly, and we all braced for the worst. I grabbed the hand of the person next to me, a stranger who, in that moment, felt like an old friend. The flight attendants walked down the aisles checking seatbelts and giving additional instructions. Some passengers were in shock, others cried quietly, and many, like me, were trying to stay calm despite the overwhelming fear. The plane descended rapidly, and I could see the ground approaching through the window amidst torrential rain. The sight of the airport lights drawing near was both a relief and a source of anxiety. The descent was turbulent, and every movement of the plane seemed to amplify the fear we all felt. There was a tense silence in the cabin, broken only by the captain's instructions and the sounds of the storm. The feeling of helplessness was overwhelming. We were at the mercy of the storm and the crew's ability to bring us safely to the ground. My hands sweated and my heart raced uncontrollably as we approached the ground. The impact of the landing was so strong that I felt my entire body thrown forward, despite the seatbelt. There was a frightening silence for a brief moment, quickly followed by the sound of passengers applauding and crying with relief. I couldn't believe we were on the ground, finally out of that hellish storm. We disembarked the plane in a state of shock, still processing what had happened. The storm outside still roared, with lightning slicing through the sky and torrential rain pouring relentlessly. Yet, inside the terminal, there was a strange contrast of calm. The airport authorities were well prepared, quickly guiding us to a safety area. We were informed that the plane had sustained significant damage due to the storm, and that we were very lucky to have landed safely. The news brought a new wave of gratitude and relief among the passengers. In the terminal, the initial chaos was replaced by a tense calm. Some passengers still cried, while others tried to contact their families to inform them that they were safe. I, still in shock, sat down on a chair and called my family. My words trembled as I explained what had happened. Hearing their voices on the other end of the line brought a comfort I didn't know I needed. We were told that the storm was moving quickly, and that flights would be suspended until the weather improved. The idea of getting on a plane again so soon seemed impossible. The airport offered us accommodations and transport to a nearby hotel, where we could rest and recover from the trauma. I accepted the offer and met with other passengers in the hotel lobby, where we shared our experiences and tried to make sense of what we had gone through. That night, lying in the hotel bed, I closed my eyes and listened to the sound of the rain hitting the window. Each clap of thunder reminded me of the moments of terror aboard the plane. But there was a sense of relief that we were all safe. The journey that was supposed to be quick and smooth turned into a nightmare I will never forget. The experience changed my perception of flying and made me respect the power of nature even more. Since that day, every time I hear thunder, I am transported back to that moment of fear and uncertainty. Even now, years later, the memory of that flight still haunts me. The journey that was supposed to be tranquil turned into a nightmare I will never forget. Each time I board a plane, I remember that emergency landing and the relief of being back on solid ground.